So Saurabh, now I can see a couple of questions. So one is about what is the PCT procalcitonin cutoff for EUNS and LONS?
Yeah, so in the first, I think he's asked the question in the context.
Yeah, Saurabh, at least I can't hear you. Maybe I don't know others can hear.
There was a loss of voice.
So you have to look at our specific nomograms to decide the cutoffs. These our specific nomograms are given both in a famous study by Chiesa et al. Chiesa, Chiesa et al. They did one of the largest studies to establish a nomogram in the first 72 to 96 hours, and that's a paper which is worth reading. Or you could look at the Neopins study, which converted that nomogram into practical stepwise cutoff values in the first 72 hours. And above those values, you would consider it to be positive.
So can you give a typical number? I guess it's very high value, especially in the first 48, 72 hours.
I mean, it goes above 10 actually in the at about, I think, 24 hours. It goes above 10. And then it finally drops down to around 0.5 somewhere at around 96 hours.
Yeah, so I think that's an important point to remember, because if we tend to follow the usual cutoffs of more than 2, then we will end up unnecessarily treating in the first 48, 72 hours. So do look at the nomogram, what Saurabh has advised. Saurabh, there's a question about how would you approach culture negative sepsis regarding duration of antibiotics? I think you did allude to it, but maybe you can re-emphasize.
Yeah, so if it is culture negative sepsis and your clinical course doesn't look like sepsis, that the patient improves very rapidly, you found some alternative diagnosis, and if your culture is sterile, your biomarkers are negative, I would actually say don't continue antibiotics beyond 24 to 48 hours. If some biomarker is positive, or your clinical course is a little more prolonged, looks a little more typically like sepsis, no alternative explanations, then up to 5 to 7 days of antibiotics. Once in a while, you may face a situation where the patient has a very stormy course, gone into what you think is septic shock, required inotropes, or has sclerema or DIC and so on, and culture comes sterile, you have no other alternative explanation, then one may give for longer than 7 days and typically up to around 10 days. But remember, all these things are all still just conventions. We don't really have any evidence to pick these numbers, but most people would tend to follow these figures.
Yeah, and I think one common scenario is that most people say, oh, no, baby is still having symptoms, so let me continue. So we need to remember that preterm babies would have symptoms because of several reasons, which may continue obviously. And Saurabh's, I think first or second slide did mention clearly that the signs and symptoms of sepsis are, so ubiquitous, they cannot be really easily differentiated from other diagnoses. So I think simply continuing because baby symptomatic, that has to be really considered seriously, whether symptoms can be explained by something else. There's a question about oral antibiotics and whether we can, switch to oral antibiotics, especially when parents want to go LAMA and baby is still symptomatic, or maybe we can't access IV line. So is there any role of oral antibiotics in neonatal sepsis?
So there is actually no evidence that oral antibiotics will work. The only situation where we have sometimes given oral antibiotics is when you are dealing with one of those conditions which requires 6 weeks of antibiotics, say an osteomyelitis or something, where you may finish the therapy after giving the first 4 weeks with IV, finish it with maybe 2 weeks of oral antibiotics, something like linezolid, which has excellent oral bioavailability. But otherwise, there's really no evidence that oral antibiotics are safe, because the bioavailability of most oral antibiotics in neonates is very unreliable or unpredictable. So if you're dealing with a llama situation and there's no alternative, then frankly, there's really there's no guideline that you're really following. You're just doing whatever is the best possible for the patient under the circumstances and hoping for the best. So no guideline can really help you in that situation. You're doing it in the best interest of the patient. So that's all that I have to say about oral antibiotics.
I think that's possibly all of us do wish that there was a safe oral and effective oral antibiotic, but the evidence obviously doesn't help us. There is a systematic review, I think it came maybe 2 or 3 years ago in I think the journal Antimicrobials, maybe, about the oral antibiotics in neonatal sepsis. So maybe people who are interested in the studies could look at that. There's a question about, is there any role of doing a vaginal swab from a mother postnatally if you suspect early onset sepsis? In other words, the obstetrician didn't send a swab, then is there any purpose or any role of doing a swab after birth?
No, I doubt whether there would be any utility of doing a high vaginal swab after birth. It's something typically done antenatally. And again, it's just a guide to your antibiotics, because remember, there's a very mixed population of bacteria. I mean, the vagina is expected to have a mixed population of all kinds of bacteria, including a whole lot of anaerobes. So that doesn't mean that the presence of bacteria there is that, that is the etiologic pathogen. So like any body surface which tends to get colonized by an entire microbiome of bacteria, simply picking it up from the high vaginal swab doesn't necessarily mean that those are the bacteria that are causing sepsis in the neonate. So it can be a guide if you are stuck. That means if you grow something unusual, high vaginal swab, you have a baby in which you've not grown anything on culture and the baby is worsening, then you may consider that, that's an organism that needs to be covered. But it cannot form the sole basis for deciding what you need to give to the baby.
Okay, and then what about the role of PCR? You yourself did a study on the utility of 16S RNA. So it's currently, is PCR of any use?
Dr. Praveen, I think connectivity is a problem at home.
Okay. So about PCR, utility of PCR.
Yeah, so universal primer PCR targeting the 16S rRNA gene of bacteria has been around for quite a while, and most studies show that it for cases of neonatal sepsis because it is more sensitive than blood culture. However, because it's not universally available, this universal primer PCR technology, and because it is sensitive, there's also a problem of false positives, that you need to be even more cautious about proper skin prep and avoiding contamination with PCR than what you are with blood culture. So these are the only two problems: accessibility and the worry that you may have some false positives at times with PCR. But otherwise, it is as good, if not better, than blood culture.
Saurabh, in the private sector, there are certain labs who are having facility for these PCR panels, and they claim they can detect maybe 50 bacteria and 20 viruses and so many fungi in single sample. And if you see the reports, then they often report multiple organisms grown from the same sample. So what is your viewpoint? Are these useful, or they are creating more confusion?
I don't know. I think PCR technology has to be combined with some kind of a pro-inflammatory marker side by side to make sense of it. Because if you have just PCR positive, it could even represent dead bacteria, because even the DNA from dead bacteria would get amplified, or dying bacteria would get amplified. The trouble is that if you are having, at least in adults, there's this whole concept of asymptomatic bacteremia. Low grade bacteremia occurs with a whole lot of procedures and various things, which will also get picked up by PCR. So that is the worry with PCR: oversensitivity and picking up dead organisms. So I would be a little cautious, if the PCR report is showing multiple organisms, and especially if, say, inflammatory markers, if there's no host response in that particular patient, then it may just simply be a false positive.
I think we are seeing, this RT-PCR for SARS-CoV-2 creating a lot of confusion already, that because of the very high sensitivity, I think so many people are turning positive. And there's some viewpoint coming that we should look at the cycle threshold and then only decide whether it's significant. Last question from the chat box. Although you again, kind of quite elegantly explained this, but I think this is a age-old question and about this use of CRP. So somebody is saying that in the papers he reviewed, CRP had more positive predictive value than negative predictive value. So does it not mean that we can use CRP to start antibiotics, whereas you said CRP should not be used to start antibiotics? Maybe you want to again elaborate.
No, I think most systematic reviews have shown that CRP has a better negative predictive value or a negative likelihood ratio compared to having a positive predictive value or a positive likelihood ratio. In fact, a recent systematic review in JAMA Pediatrics really cast doubts on the use of CRP at all in any situation, saying that it's not the kind of reliable test we used to think it was. Unfortunately, and this is a problem not just with CRP but with most diagnostic tests, people who publish papers, they try to get a single cutoff, try to recommend a single cutoff, that if it's above this cutoff it is positive, below this cutoff it is negative. But nature doesn't work like that. So seldom will you find papers on CRP saying that if CRP is between, say, 10 to 25, then this is the predictive value, this is how much it predicts sepsis. If it is 25 to 50, then this is the probability of sepsis. 50 to 100, this is the probability. So you cannot lump everything together as above 10. So obviously, if you get a CRP, say, which is above 100, then if it is a positive CRP, you have to take it very seriously, which is very different from if the CRP is, say, 15. A 15 CRP may very well mean nothing at all. Maybe within the realm of the normal range of CRP and have very poor positive predictive value. So I think one has to take into account also the magnitude and not just talk about CRP as a positive test and a negative test, making it a very simple binary. But overall, if one has to see, then its negative predictive value is much better than its positive predictive value.
Yeah, and I think there are maybe more than 700 or 800 papers on CRP in neonatal sciences, and obviously a lot of confusion because the population studied is different, cutoffs are different, methodology is different. I should read an article which came in IP, Indian Pediatrics, more than 15 years ago by David Isaacs from Australia. When he visited India for a conference, and he was shocked, so he wrote an editorial, The Abuse of CRP in the Neonatal Units. So I think that's worth reading. Saurabh, there's a question about erythromycin. So erythromycin is described as antibiotic of choice in mothers with PPROM. So is that sufficient in our scenario of gram-negative sepsis?
No, I think you had yourself alluded to this earlier, that our obstetric colleagues are also, continuing to use antibiotic combinations from studies done in the Western world, the Oracle trials and so on, which may not be relevant to real life situations in our setting. So we do need data on intrapartum antibiotic prophylaxis combinations which are relevant to our scenario.
Okay, so there's a question about scleroderma. If a baby develops scleroderma, then what should be the duration of antibiotics if the culture is sterile?
Well, I think I had referred to this a little earlier, that if you're dealing with extreme situations like septic shock, scleroderma, DIC and bleeding and so on, and you are attributing that to sepsis, then you do need to give longer than 7 days. So, typically something like 10 to 14 days is what one would end up giving.
Yeah, I think there are some trials and maybe even a systematic review looking at vancomycin locks and all that. But I think the issue is of, again, developing resistance and all. So we are not utilizing this kind of approach. There are a lot of questions about viral sepsis and viral panels. Should they be done routinely? I think the information is very limited. And I agree, a lot of sepsis which we are assuming to be bacterial could be viral. But usually the facilities are not available to extensively investigate. So this requires research. And the question obviously will be, what are we going to do? Other than herpes, there will be a specific antiviral drug available. There is a question about interpreting the CSF protein, cell counts, etc. So I think it's complex, and I would refer you to a systematic review done by Dr. Rajendra Prasad, who is currently working in AIIMS Hyderabad, and its paper is about to be published. So it basically says there's no clear answer, but it's good to go through that.